The coffee was still warm. The waitress at the Pittsgrove Diner, a woman named Ruth Aiken, who had worked the morning shift 6 days a week for 11 years, brought Danny Ferraro his second cup at approximately 7:45 on the morning of April 3, 1981. She remembered because Danny was a regular. Wednesday mornings, always the same corner booth by the front window, always eggs over easy with rye toast, and always $1 left on the table above whatever the bill required. She remembered that this particular morning he was waiting for someone. She remembered the way he kept checking the door. She remembered that when she circled back at 8:15 to offer a third cup, the booth was empty. The $1 was on the table. The coffee was still warm on the passenger seat of Danny Ferraro's truck, which sat in the diner parking lot for 7 hours before police were called. Investigators found a birthday card. Sealed. Addressed in careful block letters to Maria. Her birthday was 2 days away. What happened to Daniel Ferraro in those 27 minutes at the Pittsgrove Diner would go unanswered for the next 43 years. But before we get to how the answer finally came, and who it named, we have to go back to South Jersey in the spring of 1981. Because to understand what was lost when Danny Ferraro didn't come home, you first have to understand who Danny Ferraro was. Vineland, New Jersey sits in the flat agricultural middle of Cumberland County, a city of 53,000 built on glass manufacturing, farmland, and the particular self-sufficiency of a community that doesn't need to explain itself to anyone driving through on Route 9. In 1981, the Glass Container Corporation plant was still running. The diners were the community centers, the places where deals were struck and arguments were settled, and families gathered after Sunday Mass. The Italian-American neighborhoods in the western half of the city ran 3 generations deep, with grandmothers who still made Sunday sauce from scratch, and uncles who knew every foreman at every plant in a 20-mile radius. Danny Ferraro was 28 years old. He was 3 years into his electrician's apprenticeship with Ruiz Electric, carrying a union card he was proud of in a wallet he'd had since high school, and working toward a journeyman's exam he planned to sit for in November. His boss, Leonard Ruiz, had told Danny's father that the boy had the best hands he'd ever put on a wire, which was the highest compliment available in that particular world, and which Danny's father had repeated to everyone who would hold still long enough to hear it. Danny had been married 14 months to Maria Santoro, who had grown up 2 streets over, and whom he had known since they were both 13 years old. Their apartment on Orchard Road was small enough that the answering machine Danny had bought for Christmas sat on the kitchen counter because there was nowhere else to put it, and large enough for the child that was coming. Maria was 4 months along that April, far enough along that they had told the whole family, not far enough along that the name was final. They had 2 in consideration. They hadn't decided yet. He was teaching himself guitar from library books. He checked them out 2 at a time, returning them carefully, never overdue. He kept his chord charts in a blue spiral notebook, labeled, organized by key, with small notations in the margins that only he could have decoded. The notebook went everywhere with him, tucked in the interior pocket of his work jacket, in the same place other men kept cigarettes. He had circled a house for sale on Landis Avenue in the newspaper twice. The listing was still on the refrigerator, held up by a magnet shaped like the state of New Jersey. On the morning of April 3, 1981, when Danny kissed Maria goodbye before she was fully awake, told her not to forget her own birthday, and walked out to his truck. That was the last time Maria Ferraro ever saw her husband. Ruth Aiken confirmed the timeline in statements she gave to investigators over the following 3 days. At 7:35, Danny's truck was already in the lot when she arrived for her shift. He was in his usual booth with his first coffee, reading the Vineland Journal. At 7:50, the diner's phone rang at the counter. Sal Aiken, Ruth's husband, who owned the diner and worked the morning counter, answered and called across the room that the call was for Danny. Danny went to the phone. He was there for 4 minutes. He came back to the booth. His expression, Ruth said, was different after the call. Quieter. The door opens at 8:00. A heavy-set man in a gray jacket walks in. He does not sit down. He goes directly to Danny's booth and leans over the table and speaks for less than 2 minutes. Danny stands. He leaves money on the table. The two men walk out together. Ruth watches them go. She has no reason to think anything of it. At 8:15, she clears the booth. The coffee in the second cup is still warm. At noon, Danny does not show up to a job site in Millville, where his crew is waiting. His foreman calls the diner. Sal Aiken confirms Danny was there that morning and left with someone he didn't recognize. By 2 p.m., the foreman calls Maria. By 4:30, Maria calls the Cumberland County Prosecutor's office. By 6 p.m., a patrol officer is in the Pittsgrove Diner parking lot, standing next to a truck that has not moved. The birthday card is on the passenger seat. The officers photograph it without opening it. 3 days later, a man hunting off-season near Wharton State Forest in Salem County finds a body in a drainage ditch 11 miles from the Pittsgrove Diner. It is Daniel Ferraro. His wallet is in his jacket pocket, union card, $14 in cash, a photograph of Maria taken at their wedding. His blue spiral notebook is in the interior pocket where it always was. His cause of death: blunt force trauma. His wallet was present, which would eliminate robbery as a motive for investigators, and then complicate everything else. One detail was logged in the original supplemental reports and never followed up. Sal Aiken told investigators that the call for Danny had come from outside the diner, a man asking for Daniel Ferraro by full name. The number was traced to a payphone on Sherman Avenue in Millville, 2 blocks from the office of a local contracting company called Kalura Construction. This was noted. It was not connected to a person. The lead investigator was Detective Lou Spirito of the Cumberland County Prosecutor's Office, 44 years old, 18 years on the job, known as a patient man who built cases slowly and rarely got it wrong. He cared about this case. He had been to the Ferraro apartment 3 times before Maria delivered the baby in June. The primary suspect in the early weeks was a man named Pete Sanford, a former colleague of Danny's from his first year of apprenticeship, who had carried a grievance over a job recommendation that had fallen through the previous year. Sanford had a temper that was documented in the Union Hall records and an alibi for April 3rd that he was slow to produce. Spirito held him as a person of interest for nearly a month. Then a credit card receipt from a hotel in Atlantic City, time-stamped 8:02 a.m. On April 3rd, placed Sanford 60 miles away at the moment Danny left the diner. He was eliminated. The canvass of businesses and individuals connected to Danny's work through Ruiz Electric produced 41 names. One of them was Frank Kalura, a contractor from Millville who had hired Leonard Ruiz's crew for a commercial renovation in Vineland in early 1981 and who had an unresolved billing dispute with the company. Kalura was interviewed at his office on April 18, 1981. He told Spirito that he had spoken to Danny on the phone earlier in the week about some paperwork, and that the matter was settled. He was cooperative and calm. He had no criminal record. He was professional. Spirito noted him in the file and moved on. The payphone traced to Sherman Avenue in Millville, 2 blocks from Kalura's office, was in a supplemental report that Spirito wrote in the second week of the investigation. He had requested phone records from Bell Telephone for the payphone. The records showed the call was made. They showed nothing else. Without a witness who had seen Kalura at that phone on that morning, The thread went cold. While Spirito worked the investigation, the Ferraro family lived inside it. Maria's parents drove to the apartment every evening and sat at the kitchen table until she asked them to go. Danny's father, a man named Thomas Sr., organized a search of the area around Wharton State Forest with members of the Electricians' Union over the weekend after Danny's body was found, even though the search served no investigative function. It served another function that nobody named out loud. Danny's mother kept calling Lou Spirito's office, not asking anything specific, just keeping the connection open. Spirito always called her back. By 1985, the file on Daniel Ferraro had been transferred between two different prosecutors' offices as jurisdictional questions about Salem and Cumberland counties were sorted and resorted. Lou Spirito had moved to a different caseload. He had a copy of the key documents in a manila folder at home in his filing cabinet. He did not think of this as unusual. He thought of it as what you did when a case wasn't finished. In June 1981, Maria Ferraro had delivered a daughter she named Daniela, 2 months after the murder. Danny had never met her. There were no photographs of father and child together. By 1988, Daniela was 7 years old and had begun asking the specific kind of questions that 7-year-olds ask about dead fathers. Simple, unanswerable, and precise. Maria answered what she could. She kept a photograph of Danny in Daniela's room at her eye level. By 1995, Frank Kalura had completed 14 residential and commercial developments across Cumberland and Salem counties. His name appeared on a plaque in the lobby of a community center in Millville that he had built at a discount for the municipality. He was past president of the Chamber of Commerce and had served on the Volunteer Fire Company for 12 years. He was 51 years old. By 1998, Daniela Ferraro was 17 and had told her high school guidance counselor that she wanted to be a lawyer because the law had failed her father, and she needed to understand how. The counselor wrote this down and helped her find a college with a strong pre-law program. Lou Spirito retired from the Cumberland County Prosecutor's Office in 2001. Before he left, he gave the Ferraro file folder to a junior detective and told him it was unsolved and should stay open. He died in 2008. His daughter said, at his funeral, that there was one case her father had never made peace with. She didn't need to say which one. Every case on this channel represents weeks of digging through records, verifying facts, and piecing together lives that deserved far better. If you want us to keep uncovering the truth behind stories like this one, please take a second to like and subscribe. Drop a comment and tell us where in the world you're watching from. Now, let's get back to Danny. Then, in late 2022, the New Jersey State Police Cold Case Unit received dedicated funding to process backlogged homicides from 1970 to 1990 through forensic genealogy review. They were prioritizing cases with preserved biological evidence, cases with no arrest, cases where families were still waiting. The biological evidence in Danny's case had survived because of a decision made at the Wharton State Forest crime scene in April 1981. The responding state police evidence technician, a methodical man named Carl Ostrowski, who had been trained at Quantico and who ran his scenes the way he ran his car, carefully and without shortcuts, had collected and refrigerated Touchdina from the collar of Danny's work jacket before the standard protocols of 1981 required him to. He preserved it on the assumption that the technology would eventually catch up to the evidence. He retired in 1997. He never knew whether it had. Special Agent David Kwan of the New Jersey State Police was 38 years old and had worked the cold case unit for 4 years when the Ferraro file landed on his desk in early 2023. He read it in a single sitting. He flagged the Sherman Avenue payphone trace, the Kalura interview, and the billing dispute with Ruiz Electric. He flagged the gray-jacketed man at the diner booth. He called Daniela Ferraro, now 42, a family law attorney in Trenton, and told her he was working the case. She asked what that meant. He said he thought it meant something. She told him she'd been filing FOIA requests on this case for 15 years, and that she hoped he was right. In September 2023, the touch DNA from Danny's jacket collar was submitted to a forensic genealogy laboratory in Reston, Virginia. The process works by uploading crime scene DNA to public ancestry databases, the same platforms that millions of people use to trace their family history, and working backward through the family matches, generation by generation, until every branch leads to a single unknown contributor. The results arrived on a Thursday morning in January 2024. Quan was at his desk in Hamilton, New Jersey, reviewing a different file. He opened the report. The genealogy match had resolved to a family cluster centered in Cumberland County, New Jersey. He started building the tree that afternoon. It took 8 days. He followed every branch, cousins 3 and 4 times removed, half-relatives, branches that ended quickly, and branches that required pulling 4 generations back before the picture cleared. When he stepped back from the tree on the 9th day, every path he had traced pointed to the same name at its center: Frank Kalura. He opened the 1981 file and went directly to the canvas section. There, April 18, 1981, interviewed at his office on Spring Road, Millville, cooperative, no criminal record. Billing dispute, described as settled. No follow-up. He sat for a while with that. Then he pulled up Frank Kalura's current record. 77 years old. Port Norris, New Jersey. Retired contractor. He opened Kalura's business history: 16 completed residential and commercial developments in Cumberland and Salem counties between 1979 and 2012. He called Daniela Ferraro. It was a Thursday evening. She answered on the second ring. When he told her what the genealogy report had found, she was quiet. He waited. After a moment, she said, "I've been looking for that name my whole life, and I didn't know what it was." Then she said nothing for a while. He asked if she was all right. She said, "I'm here. I've been here." Frank Kalura had built his reputation in Cumberland County the way large reputations are built in small communities, slowly, over decades, through presence and reliability and the accumulated trust of people who hired you and found the work was good. His name appeared on the sides of trucks and on brass plaques in the lobbies of buildings he had constructed. He had been married to his wife Gloria for 49 years. He had 4 grandchildren whose baseball games he attended on Saturday mornings. He was a past president of the Millville Chamber of Commerce, a former volunteer fire company captain, and a man his neighbors described, when asked, as steady. Decent. The kind of man who stood when a woman entered the room. In the spring of 1981, Frank Kalura's contracting business was in a critical position. A commercial renovation project in Vineland, a building he had contracted, subcontracted, and billed at rates that did not reflect the materials he had actually used, had been flagged by the building's owner. The discrepancy, if it reached the right desk at the right insurance company, constituted fraud. The billing documentation that created the problem had been co-signed as a subcontractor by Leonard Ruiz of Ruiz Electric. Danny Ferraro had been the Ruiz employee on the job site. Danny had co-signed secondary documentation that Kalura needed either corrected or removed. He had approached Danny about it. Danny had told Maria there was a situation at a work site he didn't want to be part of. He didn't give her the details because he didn't want to worry her. She was pregnant. Investigators confirmed in February 2024 that a commercial insurance complaint against Kalura Construction had been filed in the summer of 1981 and quietly settled out of court by December of that year, 6 months after Danny's death. The documentation that might have made the matter criminal had not surfaced in those proceedings. It would later become clear why. The DINA warrant for Frank Kalura was approved by a Cumberland County Superior Court judge on February 12, 2024. Investigators executed it 6 days later, collecting a sample without incident. The laboratory returned its findings in 5 days. The match was confirmed. On March 4, 2024, 2 New Jersey State Police agents and a Cumberland County detective arrived at Frank Kalura's house in Port Norris at 7 a.m. It was a cold morning. His wife, Gloria, was not home. He answered the door himself, a large man moving slowly, a coffee cup in his right hand. He looked at the badges. He did not speak. He put the coffee cup on the porch railing very deliberately, as if he intended to return to it, and he put his hands out when they were asked for. He said nothing in the driveway. He said nothing in the car. The arrest ran in the Vineland Daily Journal the same afternoon. By that evening, it was on local television. People who had hired Frank Kalura for 30 years, who had sat next to him at Chamber of Commerce meetings, and who had trusted him with their buildings, called reporters and one another, and struggled for language. His pastor said he was praying for clarity. His former fire company colleagues held an emergency meeting. The word that appeared most consistently in coverage of the following days was the word that always appears in these situations: disbelief, followed closely by the word that comes after disbelief when people have time to sit with it. Kalura was charged with first-degree murder. Through his attorney, he entered a not guilty plea. 5 months later, after prosecutors presented the full package, the DINA confirmation, the reconstructed billing fraud documentation, the Sherman Avenue payphone records re-examined in context, and the testimony of Ruth Aiken, who was 74 years old, and whose memory of a warm coffee cup and a $1 tip had remained precise for 43 years, Kalura changed his plea. He was sentenced to 30 years in a New Jersey State Correctional Facility. For a man of 77, it was a life sentence. He said nothing at the sentencing hearing. He looked at the floor while the sentence was read, and then he was taken out. Daniela Ferraro was 43 years old on the day Frank Kalura was sentenced. She had spent 43 years, every year of her life, as the daughter of a murdered man whose killer had no name. She had become a family law attorney in part, she told reporters, because the law had failed her father, and she had needed to understand how. She had filed FOIA requests on the case for 15 years. She had never met her father. She had learned him the way you learn a person who exists only in other people's stories, in pieces, through his photographs, through the specific and contradictory way that people who loved someone describe them after they are gone. She stood at a podium outside the courthouse in Bridgeton, New Jersey, and she spoke for 7 minutes. She thanked Special Agent Kwan. She thanked Karl Ostrowski, the evidence technician who had preserved the Donna sample in 1981 and who had died in 2014 without knowing what it would eventually tell the world. She thanked Lou Spirito, who had visited their apartment twice in the year after her father's death, and had promised her mother, both times, that he would not give up. She said she had found, while preparing for this day, a receipt in her mother's papers. Maria had sent flowers to Lou Spirito's funeral in 2008. She had not known that until now. She said that felt important to name out loud. Then she said, "My father left his apartment on April 3, 1981, with a birthday card for my mother on the passenger seat of his truck, and a notebook full of guitar chords in his jacket pocket. He did not make it home. I was born 2 months later. I never heard him play." There is no photograph of Danny Ferraro holding Daniela as a baby. He did not live long enough to meet her. There are photographs of Maria, in the summer weeks after Daniela was born, holding a child in the Orchard Road apartment with a look on her face that anyone who has waited for something and stopped waiting will recognize. The blue spiral notebook is in Daniela's office in Trenton. It's on the shelf behind her desk, between a framed photograph of her parents at their wedding and her New Jersey bar license. The chord charts are organized by key, with small notations in the margins in her father's handwriting that she has been slowly, over years, learning to read. Following Kalura's conviction, the New Jersey State Police Cold Case Unit received a legislative appropriation to expand forensic genealogy review to all unsolved homicides from 1965 to 1995, in which biological evidence is confirmed preserved. 12 cases are currently in active processing. The State Attorney General's office cited the Ferraro case specifically in its funding request as evidence of what the methodology can accomplish when evidence has been properly maintained. The birthday card that was found on the passenger seat of Danny's truck, sealed, addressed to Maria, never opened, was held as evidence for 43 years. It was returned to Maria Ferraro in the spring of 2024. She was 68 years old. She still lives in Vineland. She opened it alone. Think about what it required for justice to find Danny Ferraro after 43 years. A diner waitress who remembered the exact temperature of a coffee cup she cleared at 8:15 in the morning in 1981. A state police technician who refrigerated a DNA sample against the prevailing standard of his era. A daughter who filed the same records requests year after year from a law office in Trenton, not certain they would ever produce anything, because she had decided, somewhere along the way, that stopping was the one thing she was not willing to do. What does it mean that a man can build a career and a community reputation across 4 decades? Plaques in lobby walls, grandchildren's baseball games, Chamber of Commerce dinners, while the evidence of what he did one April morning was sitting in a state police evidence room, waiting for technology that already existed? And what do you make of the motive, that Danny Ferraro died to protect paperwork? Is that the most common shape of murder, or the most disturbing? Justice found Danny Ferraro after 43 years. Stories like his are why this channel exists. If you believe truth is worth pursuing no matter how long it takes, subscribe. More cases are waiting in the description below. Thank you for being here.